Philosophers talk to our times. Spinoza and being thought by somebody else. I don't know. Do you have that experience? If you're talking to a friend, and do please keep them, who've been eaten by the thing, you know what I mean, the right-wing conspiracy theory that devours minds. So when you get involved in very strange, almost macabre conversations. So there we were, talking to our friend, I and my wife, who's currently in rehabilitation with 2 broken arms, and we were chatting suddenly, perfectly happily, and then all of a sudden we clearly pressed the immigration button, and there followed a lecture, I suppose would be the best word for it, that was ill-informed, that none of the figures were accurate, but it didn't matter. It was said with such vim, passion, and utter dogma. There would be no countering it, no ability to engage with it. It was a thing in itself. And what was more, our friend, who is the kindest, nicest, most gentle of human beings, voice changed. They seemed to be speaking through somebody else's voice. It went down half an octave. It was mighty peculiar. I just made my wife a cup of tea while the lecture was going on, because there was no point interrupting. And then at a viable pause, we said something that we knew would inspire the friend to respond, because she's a terribly, terribly good egg. And if she can give sympathy, she'll give it. So, this was an example. And perhaps it is an atypical example. The friend in question I'm talking about is a little atypical. I wouldn't hold her down as the maxim for all conspiracy theorists. I know a few others who behave by different rules. But she was certainly exhibiting one of the extremes, where the idea that she was saying, what she would probably vote for, didn't feel like it was anything in her own head, because of course it wasn't. She had got it from whatever misbegotten internet site she gets her news from. And you sit there going, wow. You see, 35 years ago or so, when I first, don't boast, but it was over 30 years ago, when I first read Spinoza, there was a passage in Spinoza that I kind of understood and I kind of logically accepted, but I didn't like, and didn't really understand until that moment. You see, one of the things Spinoza does is he says that most ideas we have in our day-to-day brain are what he calls inadequate. They're things we don't and cannot have an adequate, a sensible idea, an idea that contains its own cause. So, for instance, one's view upon the world. One doesn't ever see the trees, one sees how the thing that is a tree affects one's mind, what it creates inside oneself. One does not know the world that as it is. This is a bit Kantian. Kant could have got it from Spinoza, but I don't think he did. You don't know the world in itself. You know it as it is in your mind, in your body, actually, as it changes your body. And therefore your mind forms a pattern for it. And your mind can only do that. You can only have a perception of yourself in yourself, because as the body actually exists, the act of actually existing creates a unity of perception, a single perceiving thought. And that perceiving thought is itself a middle of a life. That's a bit technical, because I've gone into Spinoza scholarship. But there's always a tension in Spinoza between being in the middle of something and being a unity. He's aware that the two are not the same. And he has an elaborate explanation for God, why God's perception of his own essence puts him inside the middle of himself that can only be understood as always existing in a unity. Likewise with the body gives the unity of the perception of the mind. Okay? Now, what does that mean in common language? Well, what it means is, these thoughts, like my friend's thought, isn't really part of her mind, because she couldn't quite put it into, it was totally alien to it, if you like. It was like it was grafted on. But Spinoza allows for that. In a sequence of moves, I think it's in book 4, he talks, if you have a particularly strong affect, affects then of fear or hatred, affects of grief, that is already diminishing the body, making it less than it was, putting it into a position of pain, where you feel the very transition to being less than you are. That thought and the fear and the anger and the hatred it produces. It's perfectly capable, he says, of producing its own inner unity in your own mind. This is not the same as a conscious unity. But it's not an unconscious unity. Because that's just a dyad, it's just silly. What it is a unity that is defined by the power of the emotion and all the emotions that spin off it. And once one of those stubborn affects lodge in your brain, he says, it's almost impossible to get rid of. In fact, it is impossible to get rid of. What you can do is pull out the emotion, piece by piece. You can't directly assault it. There's no point using truth or anything, because it isn't, strictly speaking, part of the mind that has it. Oh, it's in the mind, and the feelings are of the mind. But the actual thought, the thought pattern, comes from elsewhere. It is a remarkable idea. Now, those of you who follow this series will know that a little bit of me thinks that we're moving very much into the 17th century way of thinking, because I think that things like AI, which puts everybody in communication with everybody and also creates a society of gossip and lies, is very, very 17th century model for kingship. And so it's not a terrible surprise that you're going to get the better models for psychology, not in the 19th century when everything is drawn into stodgy communities, into class, into very particular social groups, but in the 17th century where everything was a bit more mixed up, where rumour and scandal and shock were the norm, where propaganda was first really making its pitch as something other than religion and beating its tracts in the mind. So it is then not terribly surprising that Spinoza comprehends my poor friend. But then there is hope in that, because as Spinoza says, there's no point attacking the idea. It's not the idea you can deal with. The idea is nothing, literally nothing. Believe me, the idea was stupid. Her take on immigration was just not true. What gives it its unity is not the idea, but the emotion. It is always the emotion you have to tackle. If you can diminish that, humanize that, move it on, then the idea itself falls by the wayside. So when you're being whipped up into a fury in these infuriating times, on whichever side, even on my side, always take a step back for a moment. Do whatever you do, make a Molotov cocktail or a cup of tea. A pause. Come back and re-engage with humanity. It worked with my friend. And it is what Spinoza would say, in the end, was the only way you can deal with these kind of thoughts that lodge in human spirits, driving them hither and thither, so they do not know which way to turn. Remind them of their humanity.